place in Washington, D.C. within a very particular context, that of COVID-19, which has shattered communities around the world, including the United States of America. And in one of the most special and unique environments in U.S. political history, outgoing President Donald Trump will not be assisting in the inauguration ceremony, as he told the world a while ago through a tweet. Joining me live from Concord in Massachusetts, the United States of America, to discuss the incoming Biden administration and our works, especially the education of an idealist, is the former U.S. UN Ambassador Samantha Power. Ambassador Samantha Power, thank you very much indeed for joining me from Massachusetts.
My pleasure, Charles. Good to see you.
Let's start with the most obvious question. Donald Trump, president, says he will not be assisting in the inauguration ceremony of Democrat Joe Biden, whose election has been certified. And we all saw the images a few days ago from Washington. First of all, what are your thoughts about what happened on Wednesday?
Well, I must say, Charles, we've grown accustomed to a lot of ups and downs in our lives over the years, but I'm not sure politically I've ever experienced anything quite like the Democratic Party winning the state of Georgia, an African-American preacher representing the state of Georgia, a place where the Confederate flag flew not long ago, a Jewish American young man who'll be the youngest senator to take office since Joe Biden, actually, many decades ago. And in these two incredible candidates, proof that grassroots organizing can defeat voter suppression. You know, this is something that has been really sad to watch over the last decade in the United States, is politicians who are afraid to lose elections, trying to keep the voters from the polls. And I know this is something that you are familiar with from your reporting there and in other countries. And it's an outrage that this has happened. But to see in the state of Georgia just good faith organizing, good faith civil society overcoming those efforts at voter suppression, honestly, Charles, it was thrilling. It's one of the most exciting things to happen in my political life. I went to high school in the state of Georgia. I went to a high school where white community members were trying to block African-American students from coming to my high school. And the very place that I went to high school was a place that tipped this election, that neighborhood tipped this election to the Democratic Party, to these two new senators who helped give Joe Biden then a very narrow Senate majority, which is going to be critical to dealing with climate change, to our foreign aid and investments we make in Africa and so forth. So it's hard to believe, but that was Tuesday. And then the very next day, to have the equivalent of an insurrection provoked by the President of the United States, you know, that's not how insurrections are supposed to work. You don't usually have the head of state calling for the effective overthrow of elected institutions. But that is what has been happening for really several years, and now several months, and now building up and culminating in the most atrocious riot and act of aggression toward our democracy that I have seen in my lifetime. So it's been a very difficult week.
I understand the joy in your heart as a Democrat that you have total control of the Congress, both at the House of Representatives and at the Senate, and that the White House is equally under your control, and that one of the youngest senators in American history is from the state of Georgia, where you schooled Ossoff, who won in the Georgian senatorial runoffs. Just recount to me the joy equally which was in your heart the moment you realized on November 3rd, although the results were delayed a bit, that Joe Biden, your former boss, will be president of the United States of America.
Charles, it was less joy than the greatest sense of relief that I have felt in watching politics in my life, because this is, we have seen 4 years of Donald Trump's efforts to attack the media. We actually saw on Wednesday the people who threw down photographers onto the ground and began to beat them or take their cameras and smash their cameras. They were quoting the President of the United States, who had referred to the press as enemies of the people. We've seen Donald Trump try to delegitimate our democracy and our elections and claim that they are rigged and that they're not fair, which is untrue. And he's been doing that for 4 years, not since November 3rd. And so when we got word, or when we came to understand that Biden was going to win the election, it was just a relief, because 4 more years of the efforts to undermine American democracy at home, of the effort to suppress, for example, African-American voting, of the effort to keep Muslims out of this country, of the effort to shut down student exchanges and halt immigration from parts of the world where people didn't look like me, let's say, they weren't white or Christian. I mean, the damage of 4 more years, I think we were all, those of us who don't support the president, we're just carrying around this burden, and then suddenly, okay. But then, of course, immediately after Biden was announced as the winner, we immediately began to feel great stress about President Trump's attempts to falsely claim that the election results were not accurate. Okay. And so the other relief, Charles, and I want to stress this because I know people who watch your program are very disturbed, as I was watching the images on Wednesday of the Capitol being overrun by people who preach white supremacy. I mean, it's a horrifying sight. But it is really worth sort of reminding ourselves and reminding you who are watching from afar that our rule of law between November and now, and Donald Trump filed 50 lawsuits, more than 50, claiming that the election was rigged. And many, even a majority of those lawsuits, were heard before judges who had been appointed by Donald Trump, including the U.S. Supreme Court, where he got to name 3 Supreme Court justices.
Absolutely.
He has not won a single lawsuit related to the election. And so this is, in a way, the larger lesson is that, as you know, all over the world, and we now know in America, we've seen it up close, a demagogue can come along, a populist can come along, somebody who wants to be a dictator can come along. But what we have to do as citizens is we have to ensure that our institutions are stronger, that we have institutions that can withstand the pressure.
There is no debate about the strength of American institutions in being above the power of individuals. Like President Barack Obama said in Ghana, that the world needs stronger institutions and not stronger people. Barack Obama, whom you served for some time as his ambassador to the United Nations, qualifying you at one moment as one of the foremost thinkers of U.S. foreign policy. When you look at the challenges facing the world today, from environment to human rights to democracy and the rule of law, what do you think will be the key challenges of the Biden administration globally?
It's a great question, Charles. I mean, of course, I think the United States is going to be going out into the world, the U.S. administration under Joe Biden, with a lot of humility. And I think that's something that will be refreshing for some audiences around the world who maybe have been wanting to see that for some time. But part of the humility comes, of course, from what we have just experienced in having one of our own leaders trying to steal an election. That means when we come, when we come calling to complain about voting irregularities, or somebody who tries to extend their time in office or does away with term limits, as has happened across sub-Saharan Africa, unfortunately, in so many places in the last decade, We're going to be doing so acknowledging all of the vulnerabilities in our democracy that have been exposed for the world to see. And so I say that because I think that it's going to be a conversation where a lot of us citizens and a lot of people in the Biden administration will be engaging with their counterparts internationally from a position of we're all in this together. And so you asked about priorities. We're all in COVID together, right? Joe Biden's number one priority is going to be to end the pandemic and to pull the United States economy out of this recession that is the most difficult economic circumstance since the Great Depression in the United States in the 1930s. That's his number one priority. But you know what, Charles? That's President Bia's number one priority. That's heads of state all across the world's number one priority. And yet, what distinguishes Joe Biden from Donald Trump is that we recognize we can't end the pandemic for the American people and bring our economy roaring back to life as we seek, as Joe Biden seeks, unless and until this pandemic is wiped out all over the world.
You just mentioned that health diplomacy is going to be the number one priority of the Joe Biden administration. You have served in several countries around the world, moving around as a diplomat, as a journalist. You were in Bosnia during the war as a journalist. When you look at the troubles facing the world today and the fact that Biden decided to appoint your former direct boss, John Kerry, as special envoy for climate, you told me in Yaoundé back in 2016 that President Biya told you that the river in which he was bathing as a child is dried up because of climate change. How central is climate change, and how are you going to work multilaterally to tackle this?
So central that, when you pose a question as you did about what are the priorities, I have to start with the pandemic and the economy because, we have lines of people going miles and miles at food banks, people who work their whole lives, waiting for handouts. We have the equivalent of, some people are familiar with USAID and the programs that they have run on your continent. We have the equivalent of a domestic USAID here at the food banks because so many people are out of work. But when I answered COVID and the economy, what makes Joe Biden so really different, even from any prior Democratic leader, is that he doesn't think about rebuilding the economy as separate from fighting climate change. He sees rebuilding the economy as the moment in which we make the transition that we should have made long ago to a clean energy economy. And taking the US Senate, as we did earlier this week, Democrats did earlier this week, makes that much more possible for him to actually imagine putting the kind of subsidies in place to get companies to make transitions, thinking about jobs programs for people who are going to leave fossil fuel industries and pivot to solar and to wind and to other renewables. This is going to be central to the economic recovery. I think appointing John Kerry, remember who John Kerry is. He's not only a former Secretary of State, he's a former presidential candidate. He's one of the most well-respected American diplomats in our country's history. And he's, left his comfortable life, after government and come back in because this is the existential crisis of our time. And it's an example like COVID of something where we have great humility. We are a major emitter. We are a huge source of the problem. But we recognize we can't deal with the problem without China dealing with the problem because they are now the world's number one emitter. But our credibility to engage China or India or other emitters is going to come from what we do domestically and how quickly we get our emissions in check.
Ambassador Samantha Power, the U.S. first female Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, once said the United States of America is an indispensable nation in the world. Let me narrow the Biden priorities to Africa. You traveled on this continent on several occasions. When you look at the place of American clout in Africa today, where do you think the focus should be more for the Biden administration?
I think it depends really on which country you're talking about. And as you know, Americans are very prone to treat Africa, the continent, as a country, and to kind of offer one size fits all solutions. So I think the Biden administration will be very careful not to do that, because there's great knowledge, including by Linda Thomas Greenfield, of course, a great friend of Africa who's going to be in my old job as U.S. ambassador to the UN. So, stipulating that there's no one size fits all, solution, there are some common elements that run through a number of the countries on the continent. Climate change is one of them. So it's not just about curbing our emissions and trying to reduce the global temperature increases and getting back to the Paris Agreement, those commitments. It's also supporting countries like yours that are suffering the effects of climate change. And that's, again, we need the budgetary support from Congress to do that, but Biden's now in a stronger position, hopefully, to get that. Bringing the private sector to the table to view Africa and the countries within it as a source of incredible vibrancy and a continent of great economic, not only potential, but great economic dynamism. For too long, the countries within Africa have been viewed, I don't want to talk about how they were viewed by President Trump, you know that too well, but even by past administrations, as places we could think about, okay, what humanitarian assistance are we going to provide? Or how do we deal with conflict? Or how do we deal with HIV/AIDS? And that has blinded many entrepreneurs in the United States to what we know exists in Africa, which is so much economic ingenuity, small startup businesses, e-commerce, telecom, young people. Barack Obama started the Young African Leaders Program in order to try to cultivate and create relationships between young leaders and the United States of America. I'm sure that's something that Joe Biden will continue. But it's just the whole lens through which the countries in Africa would be viewed. Yes, we want to support you. If you have a conflict going, and there are a lot of conflicts still raging in Africa, we want to invest in diplomacy and support the UN and other mediators in bringing those conflicts to an end. But we see in Africa much more, again, than a country racked than a variety of countries racked with conflict. We see a partner, a set of nations. And I think that is going to involve, for example, trade summits, economic partnerships, investments in development financing, microloans, and things like that will allow the United States to be part of what other countries have done as well, which is unleashing
Ambassador Samantha Power. Ambassador Samantha Power, in a moment we'll talk about you because the interview will come into an end. As a woman, you have worked around the world, including your lectures at Harvard and other schools, defending the promotion of the rights of women, ensuring that women have access to education, human rights. When you sat in your house and you realized that Senator Kamala Harris will be, for the very first time, the female vice president in the history of the United States of America, 249 years old. Tell me your emotions. You said, oh my God, this is extraordinary, right?
It was a beautiful day. And remember, it came the Saturday after the Tuesday, I think, if I remember. So there was a wait in between. And I watched Kamala Harris speak that evening. And I stood behind my daughter, who's 8 years old. And, one of the things that Kamala Harris said to all the women and young girls watching is she said, I'm the first, but I'm here to pave a road for you to follow. And my daughter turned to me, young Rian, and she said, Mommy, she's talking to me. She's talking to me. And when I think about what that represents, also to be the daughter of immigrants, when Donald Trump has turned his back on immigration and rejected the glory of diversity and everything we have gained from immigration. That's so important. But Charles, put it also in the context of the COVID response. Kamala Harris is going to be taking office also after some of the most impressive leadership around the world shown on COVID has come from female leaders. Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, Angela Merkel in Germany, the president of Taiwan, which is Taiwan has left the rest of the world in the dust in terms of its handling of COVID. So I think, this is a real opportunity here these next 4 years to celebrate female leadership, but to do exactly what Kamala Harris talked about, which is to bring others along. And that's why Biden, I think, is working so hard to create a diverse cabinet and a diverse team that goes well beyond anything we've seen in U.S. history.
Okay, let's talk your life as a writer, as an author. Amongst your many publications is the one published in 2019, The Education of an Idealist, which has been ranked by the New York Times as one of the national bestsellers. The same can be talked about The Economist, one of the most trusted news outlets in the world, Time magazine and others. Just how central is this publication in your literary life?
That's such a great question, Charles, and I don't know that I've ever been asked it. This is the most important book I've ever done. I've written a few books, and the reason this is important is what I've tried to do in the book is I tell my life story, which may or may not be interesting to people other than my immediate family, but it's not a political book. It's a book about a young woman trying to make a difference in a really messed up world. And the reason I say that's important and more important to me than my, work on genocide or my other bigger books in some ways is that I find people all around the world, and Charles, maybe you're in this category yourself, but right now they want to make a difference. They want to make change, but they don't know what to do and where to go. And they're daunted by corruption, or they're daunted by, the fact that the people in power don't look like them. Maybe they're guys and it's a young woman thinking, I don't look like that guy. Or they see entrenched power and people who won't give power up and they think they'll never give power up.
What life lesson do you want your readers to gather from that book?
I think, first of all, to put those doubts aside and just know that there's nobody here, as we say, I don't know if you have this expression in Cameroon, but nobody here but us chickens.
Everybody expected that as soon as Joe Biden wins the election, you either be the next Secretary of State of the United States of America or a senior top White House official, because you are one of the rising stars and one of the well-established known public image of American foreign policy establishment. Which post are you being proposed to head? The U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs?
I hope that Joe Biden selects, and I'm confident that Joe Biden will select somebody wonderful for that job. It is such an important job, especially after 4 years of Donald Trump, but also with an eye to going well beyond where we did in the Obama years in terms of strengthening the partnership. In terms of me, Charles, I don't know. My view is that we in the United States and we in the world together are in an emergency circumstance.
Okay.
So to be honest, if Joe Biden calls me and has an idea for how I can support him and help him, I'm going to salute and pack my bags, because this is a very, very important and fragile time. And I don't want to be on the sidelines if he thinks there's something I can do to help. So we'll see.
Finally, you know Yaoundé so well. The Obama administration worked so effectively in an engaged form with President Biya. Since 2016, things have changed so much in Cameroon, especially with the troubles in the northwest and southwest part of the country. And I know you fairly have an idea about this, including the next U.S. UN ambassador, Linda Thomas Greenfield, who equally was here in Yaoundé. How will you like the Biden administration to engage with President Biya? Quickly.
I mean, I'm not going to be very specific here beyond to say that, given all of the crises that are intersecting at once there, the internal strife, COVID, economic, climate, the list goes on, armed groups, terrorist groups, extremist groups, etc. It's an incredibly complex situation, but the first step is to appoint somebody tremendous into the role of Assistant Secretary for African Affairs. I already know the person at the White House is going to be a first-rate senior advisor on Africa. And then, talk about the importance of what we talked about right at the beginning and what we've learned here in the United States, which is institutions, building institutions. The greatest legacy that President Biya will leave the country of Cameroon, if he chooses, is to strengthen the rule of law and strengthen institutions and give civil society space to practice accountability on all of those issues, on climate, in conflict resolution, and in terms of democratic governance. But how that conversation takes hold, again, I leave to the experts who are much more up to date on how best to engage.
Former U.S. UN Ambassador Samantha Power, thank you very much indeed for joining us from your home in Concord, Massachusetts, the United States of America.
Thank you, and my best to all the people there in Cameroon and beyond. Thank you so much. Happy New Year.